This is an interview with,
Are you interviewing
yes,
me
we're
now?
starting, yes.
Oh, the glasses, I'm sitting, is all
Whatever,
right?
yeah,
Well,
fine.
I mean, no
Yeah.
reflections and...
Nope.
All right. The only thing, I may use this because I have a drippy
That's
nose.
fine.
Okay, very easy.
With Fred Futterman
This profile all right? Yes.
at the Comfort Inn, Brooklyn, New York. It is the 18th of March, 2003, approximately 1:40 p.m. The interviewers are Mike Russert and Wayne Clark. Could you give me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth,
Yes,
please?
my name is Fred Futterman, Futterman. I was born on August 4th, 1922.
Okay, where were you born?
I was born here in Brooklyn, New York.
Okay. What was your educational background before you went into military service?
Okay, I had 2.5 years of college here at Brooklyn College, and I went into a program after the college. I didn't finish. I only had 2.5 years. Of course, I just wasn't finding myself there, and I wanted to try something. This was in the Depression, 1939. I graduated from high school in '36, and this was 1939. I went to Brooklyn College, and I left in June of '41. I went into one of these government programs at that time. It was called the NYA. I don't know if a lot of people just don't know what that is. You've heard of the CCC, more
Right.
people have heard of that. This was the National Youth Administration, and they found jobs and places to stay for these young people so that they can learn something and earn a little bit of money. I went with 2 of my friends up to a place at Elmira, New York. That was in the fall, I think September of '41. We worked at the Schweitzer glider factory. That area was known for gliders. Harris Hill was a very famous glider place. And we worked in the Schweitzer factory, and I think we got $30 a month, and they took out for room and board. We all stayed in a house, but we had something left over. We had $5. That was a lot in those days. Anyhow, we learned, we worked on the gliders. We helped build them, and this factory, I understand later on, was one of the prime makers of the gliders that we used during the invasions, where they sent in the troops. You know, they didn't expect those gliders to come back. They just crash landed, and that was it. So that's what I did after my college.
Now, what kind of work did you do while you were there?
Well, we made the wings, we made the fuselage with the wood and the canvas that goes over it and tighten it. I forgot to use the word for that, but they doped the canvases, made them real tight. And that was our work. We were there when the war started in December, and we had to serve a certain amount of time there, so I think our duty ended in April. Anyhow, I came back home, and I went to enlist.
Can I go back a minute?
Surely.
While you were there,
Yes.
you obviously heard about Pearl Harbor there.
We heard that, yes.
Where were you, and what do you remember?
It was a Sunday morning, and we were just in our house. We had no work that day. The house we were in with all the young men that were there. There must have been, 15 of us or so on. And frankly, I don't know if anybody at that point knew what Pearl Harbor was or where it was, but we heard about Japan and the war, and that was pretty much when we learned it.
Did you have any feelings about this?
Well, we were youngsters then, and we knew about wars because World War I, which wasn't named World War I until World War II came along, that the war to end all wars was only 20 years prior to that. So you'd watch the veterans from there parading and so on. So you had an idea of a little bit about war. But other than that, again, we didn't know what was going on in the Pacific until the papers started to come out with things, and that was our extent of the knowledge. But you want me to continue along that line, or?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Anyhow, I came home and I wanted to enlist in the Navy.
Why did you pick the Navy?
Okay. Well, I was interested, for one thing, in aviation, and I didn't want to wait to be drafted and get into the Army and be a foot soldier. Let me just backtrack a little bit about aviation. I remember when I was in kindergarten in Brooklyn, this was right after Lindbergh came back from his flight, and he was, they had a parade for him in the neighborhood, and as a school, one of the school kids, we had to line up on the street because his, the car he was in passed by, so we saw Lindbergh. So that was one thing about aviation. And of course, every time we would see an airplane, which wasn't very often in those years, we'd say, "Oh, there's Lindy." You know, that's what the kids were doing. So I just got into aviation. Then when the New York World's Fair was here in 1939, it was the first time I went up in an airplane. I went with my brother-in-law, my sister's husband, from Floyd Bennett Field here in Brooklyn. We flew at night over the World's Fair. Well, that flight was just a thrill to me. And I just got interested somehow in aviation. And again, being up at the glider factory, which is affiliated somehow. So I learned of a program that the Navy had. It was called the V2 program. That would be the aviation, the Naval Air Corps. And if you sign up for that, you enlisted on your own. That was where you would be. They couldn't take you out of that unless you offered to go somewhere else. But so I wanted that branch of the Navy. And I went down there, I think it was about the beginning of May, to the recruiting office downtown Manhattan on Broad Street. And we went through the whole rigmarole of this doctor and that doctor, typical exam, going in there, an exam. And I have a cute little anecdote that I'll never forget. I had all my papers. As you went from one doctor to another, they gave you the papers to keep till you come to the end. And I gave my papers, I handed to a guy in a white coat, I presume he was a doctor. And he said to me, "Hold out your hands." I held them out. And he says, "Now turn them over." Okay, he looked at him, he says, "Come back when you stop biting your fingernails." Well, this was a very strange thing to me, but I presume that they wanted, you know, sort of a nervous habit, and they just wanted to see if you could do that, because the Navy was quite strict. For a lot of years, until towards the end of the war, they didn't draft anybody, and their standards were quite high as far as health goes and so on. So this was May. I let them grow. I came back there in June. All I did was hand in the papers and he looked at my nails, or somebody did, and they took me, and I went in on July 7th, 1942. So it was about 6-7 months right after Pearl Harbor, and the Navy. You want me to continue?
Yes, where did you go for your training?
I went up to boot camp at Newport, Rhode Island. Now that was an old, real old Navy base. They had the Naval War College up there. I think it's still up there.
Yes, it is.
Right. And they were very, very real Navy, real strict. Every Saturday we had a dress parade, and you know, that was what we learned up there, to be real Navy in a sense. I was there about 5 weeks, I believe. I came home, and we had some leave. They gave us, I don't know, a week or 2 weeks off. And then I was sent to Dearborn, Michigan. Oh, by the way, when I was leaving boot camp, they wanted to know if I wanted to go into submarines, because they knew I was in this V2 program. They put a line on a wall, and if you walk under it, which I was able to do, they were looking for people for submarines, but I didn't want any part of that. Then they wanted to send me to what they call fire control school, which was in Anacostia, Washington, right out of Washington, D.C. Well, the fire controls, you're on the big ships, the big cruisers for the big guns and the battleships. But again, I wanted to stick with what I wanted. So I was sent to Dearborn, Michigan. to the Ford plant out there, who was making engines, Pratt & Whitney engines for the Army and for the Navy airplanes. So we started to study that in Dearborn, Michigan. You do classroom work, you did real mechanical work on these engines. This is part of what we were learning. This eventually led to my ranking as a machinist mate, aviation machinist mate. That was the ranking that I received. I don't recall exactly how long we were in Dearborn, but this is also an interesting thing. Of course, that's where the Ford family lived. And our barracks officer was in charge of, I don't know, maybe 50 men in the barracks or a couple of barracks. He was our officer. Henry Ford II was Henry Ford's grandson. And he was, I don't know, maybe 2 years older than I was at the time, but of course he was an officer, which goes without saying. And he was our officer. He had a high, squeaky voice, and every time he'd make a command, we would giggle. It just sounded so funny, you know, for an officer. And they were very nice to us. He himself, we went to his house for Christmas. He had a party for the men that served under him. And the Ford family, they enhanced the monies that the Navy allotted for food for the mess. They always added something, so we ate pretty well there in that mess, especially on the holidays. They gave ice cream and cigars and these kinds of things, you know, to celebrate. So that was interesting in Dearborn. And that was in the winter of '42, but it was cold up there. Quite a few times I had to be out on duty, working guard duty at night at 2 in the morning, and it was cold. By the way, for the first 6 months I was in the Navy, I slept in hammocks because that's the way it was at that time. Later on they had bunks for the recruits and so on, but we slept in hammocks, and after a while you get used to them. You don't fall out too often, but you carried it with you. You had your own bed and bedding and so on. All right, that was Dearborn. From Dearborn, we went to Chicago, to Great Lakes. And there we did some more training. I think then we did a lot of training. We worked on machinery, like lathes, know how to make parts and that type of thing. So we were there for, I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks as another part of our machinist training. In addition to engines, you learned other things about airplanes, aerodynamics, and that type of thing. When I left Chicago, the Great Lakes, I was sent to a gunnery school out in Oklahoma, Purcell, Oklahoma, which is right near Norman, where the University of Oklahoma is, and not far either from Oklahoma City. Well, we went on a troop train down there, and a few of us that were going to end up in Purcell were in the last car of the trains, and they dropped us off about 4 in the morning at Purcell, and then they came out and got us that morning in the middle of nowhere. I'll tell you, there was just nothing around there, just flat red clay. That's what Oklahoma had a lot of. Anyhow, that was my experience going to Purcell. Purcell was a town really out of the past. Had only wooden sidewalks, and you'd see the Indians would come there and just lay on the sidewalks in Old Town, like you see in the cowboy movies. So we took gunnery training there. We used the machine guns, 50 caliber and 30 caliber. We learned to use those. We learned to hit moving targets with skeet shooting. That was for moving targets. You get an idea how to handle that. We also learned how to use a 45 pistol, 45 automatic. That was at Purcell. Again, we were there maybe 5, 6 weeks, I don't know for sure. I was sent to Jacksonville, Florida, the Naval Air Station in Jacksonville, which is, it may still be one of the largest naval air bases in the country, for what they call operational training. I was assigned to a training squadron there, and we were working on, our planes were these Catalina flying boats, PBYs, which we used for anti-submarine patrol and convoy escort, That's what these were used for. So that's what I was trained to fly in. We spent quite a few months doing the training there. We learned how to, and ours was, that squadron was strictly a seaplane. It wasn't amphibious, even though they made amphibian planes of the same nature, PBY-5As, they were amphibious. But ours was strictly seaplanes. So you learned how to take them out of the water and put them up on land with the tires that you attach and those types of things. Learn how to handle your PBYs. And the pilots learned how to go with the crews because they were pretty new also in these things. So you learn pretty much how to operate in those planes. That was the operational training. I also was designated as a flight engineer. The PBYs are a high-wing airplane, big, slow airplane, look like a boat on the bottom, and it's attached to the fuselage by a tower between the top of the fuselage and the bottom of the wing. Well, in that tower is where the flight engineer sat because he had engine controls which he used in coordination with the pilots when they were starting the airplane and when they were shutting it down and when they were making adjustments within flight. It's like a dashboard on a car. You had all these instruments. So I was a flight engineer, an aviation machinist mate, and gunner. That's what everybody on a plane had to go to gunnery school before that. So that was at Jacksonville Air Base. From Jacksonville, I was sent home after the training. Am I going too fast?
No, this is fine.
I was sent home after the training for, I don't know, a week or two. And my papers read for Quonset Point, Rhode Island. I went to Quonset Point, Rhode Island at the end of April, towards the end of April, and I was assigned to a squadron. It was VPB 63. I have that on my hat. I have that label. And then we start, preparing to go overseas. We did convoy patrols out of there. And as a matter of fact, the first flight I took with this squadron was on May 30th, Memorial Day. And we crash landed coming in. This was a good way to start with a squadron. Thank God I wasn't hurt. I got just bruised on my nose, but the plane started to sink because it popped some rivets in the bottom of the plane, and the bay wasn't that deep, but the plane did sink. We all got out. One fella broke a leg. That was the extent of it, and we were all lucky. Anyhow, all our clothes were wet, so we had to go to sick bay there so they can give us some tetanus shots. And we came back to the barracks at Quonset Point with just blankets around us because our clothing, we couldn't put them on. So we come back into the barracks and there's a bunch of sailors that just came from boot camp. I was already a seasoned sailor. They just came from boot camp and they're looking at us. I had methylate on my nose, from the bleeding and so on. And the other guys had something else. And they said to us, "We're not in a war zone yet. What happened to you guys?" So these are the things, that you remember. I'm talking 60 years ago. All right, so we took our training there, part of the training with the squadron, and then we were to go over to Iceland. They told us in Iceland we'd be there about a month, and then we'd come back to the States. Anyhow, we didn't fly in our planes to Iceland. A group of us, the crews, were sent we went over to Boston and picked up a ship to Iceland. It was a seaplane tender, which obviously would be good for our kinds of planes. It's a much smaller ship than even a destroyer. But we went on a seaplane tender. We didn't have any chores to do. We were strictly passengers on that flight. And we went up there, and most of us slept on one of the decks in bags. But a couple of times during the night, they would shoot at icebergs, their 5-inch guns. If your head was against that deck, you felt it. Anyhow, we got to Iceland. Now, this was in the summer.
Did it go alone, or was it in escort with anything else?
No, that went alone. I don't think there was, I don't remember an escort. We were pretty close to the States, and that was still fairly early in the, North America, I should say, during the war. although when we were in Quonset back again a little bit, we made a few convoy escort patrols to certain area so that we can come back to Quonset, and then another group would pick them up later on, maybe out of Iceland or so on. So that's what we were doing at Quonset. Anyhow, we got to Quonset Point, and then our planes were flown over by just crews that did this. They ferried the aircraft and then came back. So we were there just about a month. This was the height of the summer in July, and it was daylight all day. You know, that's where the sun doesn't set. We played ball until 11:30 at night. The sun went down the horizon maybe about an inch and just came right up again. So in the Quonset we slept in, we had these big black shades to block out the light, otherwise you couldn't get any sleep. But Iceland was fun. We flew over the Arctic Circle, saw the volcanic holes they have in Iceland, you know, they have hot steam come out of it. That's how they warm that country up, by the way. They utilize the steam. And we were there a month. Instead of coming home, we were sent to Great Britain. We were sent to Wales. There was a RAF, a Royal Air Force base, at Pembroke in Wales, and we went to that base. We shared it with the British, who were doing anti-submarine patrols, excuse me. And our regular crew, well, we went there, but we flew over with our plane, but the regular crew, like the mess people, you know, made the food, they didn't come for 2 weeks. So for 2 weeks we were eating with the British, which was pretty bad, you know, with their mess. But luckily, after the couple of weeks, our own mess came. But the officers still had to eat with the British, so they didn't take the advantage of the better food. Okay, our job in Pembroke was to fly anti-submarine patrol in the Bay of Biscay. Now that's, if you know the map of France, it's a little indented part, and that's where the Germans had their, of course they had already captured France. That's where the Germans kept their submarines. They would bring them back at night or wherever from their tour into the submarine pens, and that's where they would go out from into the Atlantic, North Atlantic. We were the first Navy personnel in the Atlantic, based in the Atlantic area. And obviously the first Navy, the first Air Force, Naval Air Force personnel. About 2-3 weeks after we were there, one of our patrol planes was shot down at night from German aircraft, Ju-88s I believe they were. And we got the reports, and our particular crew, my crew number 8, was sent out to search for them. Middle of the night, we started out. Now these PBYs could stay up a long time. On average flights we may stay anywhere from about 6 to 14 hours. You know, we can patrol that long. The wings were very large and we went very slowly, which was a perfect patrol plane. Anyhow, this night we were out for 18 hours and 10 minutes without landing any place. That's a pretty long flight. Of course, we had a lot of food aboard these planes and so on, you know, because they always made long flights. We didn't find anything, but we understand that they were picked up by a British corvette, which is like a destroyer. It so happened the corvette ran into a German ship also, so they had a little battle after they picked these people up. But 5 of them were killed, you know, when they were shot down, and a few wounded came back. One of my best friends was one of those. He had a lot of very badly wounded, but he was able to come back.
Can I ask you a couple questions?
Certainly.
Did you fly the same plane all the time, or?
Most of the planes were the same. I have my logbook with me, and until they needed some kind of repair, you went to others. But for the most part, we took care of, maintained our own planes. Yes. Did you ever name the plane or anything like that, or? I don't recall a particular name for our plane, but the planes themselves, the PBYs, were called Catalinas.
Yes.
And I don't know really where that came from.
Yeah.
It's possible. I don't have a record on naming the plane.
What kind of?
Yeah, go ahead.
When you were flying, you know, I know we've interviewed a lot of the Air Force bomber personnel. what were your flying suits like? Did you have to wear heated suits, or
No.
you
First
didn't go up
place,
as high?
first place, we never went over. We usually cruised and patrolled at maybe anywhere from 4,000 to 6,000. One time we went up over about 10,000 because we didn't even carry oxygen. The planes were not made for that.
You're right.
But there's something else I just want to mention about our particular squadron. There was one squadron like ours in the Atlantic with special equipment, which I'll explain in a minute, and one squadron in the Pacific with the same equipment. So we were really very special. And it was a type of sonar which would spot submarines. But it was a piece of equipment that was added on to the tail of our planes. It looked almost like a small torpedo. It was a tube. It may have been about 3 feet long, which had electronic equipment in there. Now this worked with bombs that we had aboard the plane. The bombs were actually under the wings. And the way this worked, we had a screen in the airplane at the radio menus, similar to a radar or a sonar screen. And when there was you were aware that there was something below, you got a signal on the screen that there was something below in the water, our bombs were automatically released and they went straight down. But they were released backwards rather than forward, so it made up for the speed of the airplane. Normally a bomb has a trajectory. So this was a different thing. It supposedly went straight down. Actually, our squadron got credit, not my particular crew, but our squadron got credit for 3 submarines. But I think this was in the North Africa area, which I'll get to soon. Anyhow, again, we call that magnetic airborne detector, we called it MAD, M-A-D. So we were the only ones that had that type of equipment. I'm trying to think how long we were in Great Britain. I think till December of '43. Yeah. Then we went to North Africa. We went to a base in, I'm trying to think of the name again. Let me see if I got this here. How do you like this? It's okay if I look?
Yes.
Yeah, you'll edit me, Port Leoty. That had been a French base that was they captured when we went into North Africa, and we went into that base. It was right on a river, actually. We took off from a river. That was about 30 miles from the capital of Morocco. This was in Morocco, which is Rabat is the capital. We were about 30 miles from Rabat. And what we did, we patrolled the Straits of Gibraltar, because at that time we were starting with the Italian campaign and the southern France campaigns. And our duty was to patrol the straits back and forth between Spain, or Gibraltar actually, and Morocco, I believe. No, Algeria, that's where it was, towards Iran. But it was Tangiers is where the straits were. And that was the way we did it. Now, the way we worked it, we'd fly there during the day, patrol for, depending, I don't know how many hours, 5, 6 hours or what. And then when it got dark, we landed, just before dark, we landed at Gibraltar and stayed overnight. It was a British base, right by the rock, just the way it looks. And the next morning, we would start patrolling again and fly for so many hours and go back to Port Leoty. So we did one day and the next day and then went back to our base. And we stayed at the British base. It was not very comfortable. We slept on biscuits with just straw pushed into something. And we visited Gibraltar, a very interesting place. Now we stayed in Africa for quite a while, and I think this was in June or July of '44. We had to take our particular airplane back to the States for a major overhaul. It had to be brought back to Norfolk, Virginia, the air base there. The engines had to be changed, and anything that they checked out that had to be repaired or replaced. It was a major overhaul because it had acquired so many hours, and that's what they had to do. Well, to get back to the States, we went from Port Lyote to the Bulge in Africa, if you're familiar with the shape, which is closest point to South America. It's near Dakar. It was a British air base called Bathurst. So we stayed there overnight. We had to make these stops because, you know, the planes had to land and refuel and resupply the plane with food and whatever else had to be done. We just couldn't keep flying. So we stayed overnight at Bathurst for a couple of days. From Bathurst, we went to Natal, Brazil, which is at the corner of their bulge. Also, these are all naval air bases that we had. Now we're at the Navy bases, our Navy. We went from Natal, after being overnight, to a place called Belém in Brazil, which is the northern part of Brazil on the Amazon River. Beautiful Portuguese little town. From Belém, we went up to Trinidad, and from Trinidad, again, stayed overnight in these places. Trinidad, we went to San Juan, Puerto Rico. From San Juan, we went to Jacksonville, and then back up to Norfolk, Virginia. I forgot how long it took us, maybe 10 days or something to come across. When we went from Africa to South America, we crossed the equator, which was some kind of event, I don't know. But in the Navy, it had some significance. We left the plane at Norfolk, Virginia, and we got leave. I think we had about a month at the time. So I was home. I wasn't married yet. I went to see my girlfriend and other friends that were home. We got back to Norfolk, and we had to go to a place near Louisiana to pick up a brand new PBY to bring to the Russians under the Lend-Lease program. I'm sure you're familiar with that. We paid for these things. And we picked up a brand new PBY. It had Russian markings on it, no Navy markings, and it was filled with food for the Russians, which we couldn't touch. That was their stuff when we delivered it. We delivered this to Kodiak, Alaska, where the Russians picked it up. From Louisiana, in the Lowlands area, we flew to a place called Eagle Mountain Lake in Texas, which was near Fort Worth, and it was a lake. We had to land there. And at night we put up the Russian flag on top of the wing, and nobody said anything. They didn't come to shoot us or anything. You know, we were still young. We still tried to have fun where we could. From Eagle Mountain Lake, we went to San Diego, California, and we stayed there. From San Diego, we went to a place near Seattle, which was Whidbey Island. It was a fairly new Navy base, and we stayed there for about a week. But before we got to Whidbey Island, our pilot, who came from Seattle, you know, it's got 7 hills in Seattle, he flew over in this big lumbering airplane, and he spotted his house. He pointed his house out to us. This guy was a real daredevil, but we would go any place with this pilot. He was just somebody you would trust with your life. And we went to Whidbey Island. We stayed there, and we had to adjust the compass. They call it boxing the compass because we were going up towards the Arctic area. And other things we had to do with that plane, and maybe wait for the Russians to get set to pick it up on the other end. Anyhow, we flew from there to Whidbey, right into Kodiak, Alaska. And that was pretty treacherous with a seaplane because 3 sides were surrounded by a mountain up there, so that'd be pretty good. But again, with our particular pilot, Lieutenant Nicholson, we didn't mind. We did things like that. He was crazy with some things anyhow. Again, overnight we handed the planes over to the Russian. Then we got a transport back to Anchorage where they refueled, and they took us back to Olathe, Kansas, which actually was pretty much the middle of the continental United States. Actually, it was only continental in those years. Alaska wasn't in the thing, or Hawaii yet. So Olathe was a transfer point for people coming from all directions that needed transportation to their bases and so on. We got in there about 11 o'clock at night, and it was, can't tell you, mobs of people, Navy personnel, Marines, everybody. But we were traveling on a 1A, I forget what you would call that. Great. But anyhow, we had, priorities. The only priority that was higher than our priority was the mail. The U.S. mail had to go through above anything else. So if you didn't have a 1A priority, you were down much lower on the list, you'd have problems getting flights. Anyway, we went up to the counter, showed them our priority, and got a flight pretty quickly to Floyd Bennett Field. And they were delivering a cannon, a battleship cannon, to that area, I guess the Brooklyn Navy Yard eventually. So the only thing on that plane was that big cannon and the crews with the 1A priority and some mail. So that took us back to Floyd Bennett Field, right near my home. So again, I went home for some time there. And then this all reversed itself now. We had to go back to Norfolk and backtrack again back to Africa for a little more flying. That was until December of '44 when I was discharged. Not discharged, I left Africa. And we came back home by also a seapoint tender, picked it up at Casablanca. Oh, by the way, when we were stationed at Port Leote, Humphrey Bogart's was there. He was waiting for Pan American Clipper, which landed at our base periodically to take him back to the States. I don't know whether he was entertaining the troops in Africa or what, because I think it was a little later after he had made the Casablanca movie. But he was on, he and his wife, first wife, were on the base. Very nice, you know, we had fun with them. That was just something I wanted to tell you.
Did you get to talk to, you got to
Yeah,
talk to
sure,
them?
yeah, he was on the base and, you know, very, very friendly. We had a lot of Italian prisoners also stationed on our base. But they didn't really do anything. We did all the grunt work there. It was just prisoners. All right, this is December of '44. So we got on the Seapoint tender. We were supposed to make a stop in Bermuda, but we ran into very, very bad storms in that area. That ship was really listing, and we couldn't stop. We had to go back into Norfolk. So when I landed at Norfolk, this was just around Christmas time, I called my wife-to-be and I said, we're going to get married. And this was the end of December, and we had a full wedding. She did it all on her own, January 7th, 1945. In about 2 weeks, cards went out and everything. The whole thing was planned. We got married, and I was stationed in Floyd Bennett Field for a couple of months. I was in a different squadron, and they were training me to go to the Pacific at that time, different kinds of airplanes and so on. But most of the work we did there was, well, we were learning on new aircraft, and we also ferried airplanes from one place to another, you know, just take passengers, take the airplane out and come back on another one. That's what we did mostly in Floyd Bennett. And after, I think it was in April now of '45, I was sent back to Gunnery School in, no, this was not in Oklahoma, this was in Florida, Brown River, I think it was called, near Jacksonville. I'm not sure of the name now, but it's a river, and that's where we took Gunnery School again. At this time, they were training us for airplanes which had the turrets on them, to learn to use machine guns with turrets for planes that they were going to send to the Pacific. Well, right after that, though, was when Germany surrendered. So it was only Japan that they were fighting at this point. And I had we accumulated points for the length of service you were in. And at that point, at that time, they wouldn't send you to another theater of operations. If you had all these points, you would be eligible to be retired from the service. So I accumulated enough points, even though my wife joined me at different places. We went to Norman, Oklahoma again for another reason. I went to school there again. And then she joined me there in Norman, Oklahoma. And we went back to Jacksonville, Florida again, At Jacksonville, I was considered what they call ship's company. I worked with a duty officer on the base. I wasn't doing any flying anymore. And we were there until I was discharged in October. I came home from Jacksonville, Florida. And she was with me for a time, when we were married. That's my Navy experiences. I want to just see if I missed anything that I wanted to speak to you about. I think unless you have other questions.
Did you stay with the same crew?
No, not once I left Africa.
But while you were in Wales and
From
in North Africa?
Quonset Point, with a few exceptions, okay, from Iceland to Wales, yes, we stayed with the same crew. We had the same pilots for the most, and occasionally you get another one for a training flight or something, and different people. What happened, though, when I was sent back to the States for the overhaul, not all of the crew was sent to the States. They stayed, still flight, and were put into other crews. Unfortunately, one of my good friends there was killed in a plane exploded off North Africa. They don't know actually what happened. They don't think he was, they were attacked by aircraft or anything, and they never found any bodies or anything.
Were you ever under attack by aircraft at all?
The only time we were attacked, well, one time off France, we saw a couple of German planes, but thankfully they were going in the wrong direction. Or maybe they spotted us and said, let's not bother with them. But when we were flying in the Straits of Gibraltar, we flew too close to Spain, which theoretically was neutral, I say theoretically. And they shot some anti-aircraft at us. I don't think they meant to hit us, but you felt it, and you saw the puffs of smoke that you always see in movies. That was the only thing I came close to. But,
what kind of flight suits did you wear?
You asked me that already. I didn't tell you.
Yeah, I did.
Well, first place, we could not wear, we didn't have any parachutes. That plane was not set to go with parachutes. Well, I'm sorry, we had them, but we couldn't wear them in the airplane. The only thing we wore in the airplane were the inflatable vests, the Mae West. We had, in the summertime, we had these full coveralls, flight suits, full coveralls. And actually, we wore that in the winter also, but we had heavy flight jackets, if it was cold weather, which was cold many times, and the heavy flight boots, the leather ones, with the, not the fur inside, the pile inside there. That's what we wore. As a matter of fact, it's quite interesting. The coldest place I was at, where they actually issued me 2 extra blankets, because the original issue was 2 blankets. In Africa, it got so cold at night by contrast, because at day you could hardly get into the tents. At night, the desert doesn't hold any heat, so it was very cold. I slept with my heavy flight jacket on, and I had the boots by the bed in case I had to go out. But it was just funny that that's the place in Africa which was the coldest. But we wore these overalls, or sometimes just our work outfits like this, jeans and these kinds of shirts. But most of the times it was the coveralls, depending on the flights. And we had the heavy stuff with us, but the only thing you could wear, you couldn't wear a parachute like they did in, some of the Air Force bombers, because we were moving around too much. We ate on board, we were able to cook, there was a little stove there and different things like that, and we moved to the window where we could see things, so we couldn't wear the parachutes. They're afraid of it going off in the plane. So that's pretty much what we wore.
It's going to be a goofy question. What about bathroom facilities on your planes?
Okay. At the end of the plane in the back, there was a hatch and a little door, and you go in the back. I'll tell you a little story about that also, if you don't mind. There was a seat, and you used bags in the, on a can actually, with a seat, and you put bags in there. Because they didn't use the disinfectants like you use on regular airplanes, or the water. And theoretically, you weren't supposed to throw it out, but you're over the ocean, you threw the bag out when you're done. The other thing, to urinate, you had tubes that actually went out. So that's, rudimentary, but that was what you had to have. Listen, we flew along hours, and you had to have that. And I get back to this thing with the toilet in the rear. Lieutenant Nicholson, when we were crossing the equator, he went into the rear, and we were all decided to take a photograph of him, which I still have. I don't know if I brought it. And he knew it. He heard us talking. Well, we got all set, and I think I took the picture, I'm not sure. One of the guys opened the hatch, and he's sitting there with a big smile on his face as we were crossing the equator. You know, we just wanted to make an event out of it. But that was the kind of crew it was when you're doing these things. You know, everybody was for everybody else, and they weren't highfalutin officers. They did what they had to do, and they liked their men, and vice versa. You know, and you really had an allegiance to each of the people there.
Being in the Navy, did you do anything special when you crossed the equator and other ships do?
Well, yeah, they do something, but this was the only thing we did, as far as I remember. I think we were supposed to get some kind of certificates about something, but I don't recall that.
Do you remember your reaction when you found out about the death of President Roosevelt?
Yes, actually, I was stationed in Futterman field, and I came home, and I don't know whether, actually, we were already married then, and we were staying with my mother-in-law, my wife's mother at the time. She had room for us, because my wife was working. I don't know if I heard it when I got home, but I think when I was walking home from a bus that I had taken, I heard it in the streets, or people were talking about it, or somehow the radios were blasting. I don't know if I had a little radio at that time. I don't think I did. But that was a real blow to everybody, you know, with Roosevelt. And, you know, time before that, a youngster, nothing ever like that ever had happened. We didn't know of it. This was a terrible, terrible tragedy when we heard of that.
What was your reaction when you found out about the atomic bombs being dropped?
Well, that too, at that time, we didn't know too much about it. We heard about it, of course, and until you read the papers, whatever they wanted to tell you about, we didn't really know the impact of what that meant. We knew it was a very destructive bomb, and obviously killed a lot of people. But of course, we were, at that point, we wanted to defeat Japan, so that was okay. But we didn't really know the impact of what that might be until you got older.
Did you ever make use of the GI Bill when you returned?
I went to, not very much, but I did use it partially. I went to at LaGuardia Field. There was I think it was something KC flight school. And again, I was continuing with my aviation mechanics and so on. I thought I may want to continue with that. And they paid for that. I used to go at night after I was working. But then I had to stop. It was too much. We had a family already, and I just didn't want to do that.
Did you ever make use of the 52-20 club?
I've heard
it was 52 weeks. You received $20 a week. It was like an unemployment after you left the service.
I don't believe so, because I was working then, and I didn't do that.
Did you have you stayed in contact, or did you stay in contact with any of your crew?
For about a year or so. There was a gentleman up in Boston, and one of my closer friends on the crew out in Pennsylvania, right near Pittsburgh. I had been in contact with him. As a matter of fact, he came one day with his wife, and they stayed over a couple of days with us here in Brooklyn. He was the ordnanceman on the crew. Some of the pictures that we may look at, if we do, I'll show you who they are. He was pretty close. So as I say, he visited and we spoke to each other, he sent letters. But after a while, again, you're raising a family, you're into your own thing, and you lose track. I know some people never did, but there was one other person that was really in Brooklyn, in my neighborhood, and I went to visit him once. He wasn't in my particular crew, but I knew him from the Squadron. I think we had 15 different crews in the Squadron. And you know, I contacted him. I went over to his house a little bit. Again, it's all, everything is different, you know. When you're in the Navy, you're all the same. Afterwards, you go back to the life you had. But I still, more recently, the last couple of years, I've got a lot more interested in what I was doing and what I did then and so on.
Were there ever any kind of reunions or anything? Or?
I never went to one. I never was contacted. I never pursued it. If I show the interest I do now, frankly, you know, as you get older, you look back on things. I may have continued. You may have. I know they've had reunions because I've seen it on the computer.
Have you Did you join any veterans organizations
No, I
at
was
all?
never a joiner. No,
The Jewish veterans?
no, I
You
didn't
never
join
joined?
any of those
Okay.
groups at all.
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Okay, how do you think your military time affected or changed your life?
Well, for one thing, it was a good place to learn discipline, which I think I've used knowingly or unknowingly with everything I do, and the value of good friendship and people you can trust to be with. And it was an experience that if you come out of it whole is very, very interesting, worthwhile. It's just an unusual kind of experience for a person. I was in for, this I don't forget, 3 years, 3 months, and 11 days. That's a long time. And I even remember all my, dog tag numbers. But it is a defining moment, I believe, certain things. You know, you're surrounded by people getting hurt and killed and so on, and you know every time you're there, you go up in an airplane, you can crash, anything can happen. But you're young, you enlisted, and this is what you expect. You weren't afraid of doing these things when you're younger. And it was a discipline, you know. You took an oath to do something, you did it. That was it.
Okay. Huh.
So did you learn anything from me?
Yes. We're going to learn some more. When was this photograph
This,
taken?
I believe, I don't have a date on it, but I pulled it out of a book my wife had made. And I believe it was from boot camp, because I had no insignia on it. And as I say, later on, I was an aviation machinist, second class, which had 2 stripes, which you'll see on that medal.
Now, how old are you in that picture?
Well, let's see, out of boot camp, and I was probably just 20. Just 20 years old.
Okay.
Okay, how about showing us your,
Which one is
your
mine?
squadron?
Number 8.
You said this one, right?
Squadron number 8. Can I look at it this way? Is that
Sure.
okay for you? Well, this is me, which is the worst of the pictures. This is professor. Listen to me, professor. I go to school now, so I have professors. Lieutenant Nicholson. This is what they call the captain of the crew. Repass. He was a first-class mechanic. This was a radio man, and this was my friend who was an ordnance man, which was, you know, the munitions and the guns and so on. This was an enlisted pilot. You know, at those days they used pilots who weren't commissioned. He was a chief, yes, because they used to train him, and they weren't giving many commissions then. Nicholson, I told you, I don't remember his name. These were 2 other pilots from other crews that sometimes were with us and sometimes weren't, so I can't really give you their names. They're on here, but I don't know. But this was one radio man, and this was the other radio man. Okay.
Okay. And you, oops. Yeah,
Which one is
this,
this?
what is that?
This is I was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. Actually, I was not aware of this until 6 months after I left the service. And one day, my wife called me at work, and she told me I got a package from the Navy in a big envelope. I told her, she says, it's a medal. I didn't know what she was talking about. Anyhow, when I got home, I got the medal that you saw, the Distinguished Flying Cross. And there were other copies of this particular citation, but you know what I mean? I made extra copies, so I put one in this. This is awarded because I believe it says there were 20 flights through a given period in the Bay of Biscay. I think that's what it is.
How many flights, how many missions did you fly?
Well,
totally?
this Distinguished Flying Cross, you're eligible if you have 20 missions. I would say combat missions, I probably flew maybe around 50 to 60. You know, missions where you're just training, so I didn't include. But I have over 1,000 hours in my logbook. And that's what this was for. You know, I wasn't aware of it coming to me. All right, now this, again, is this okay?
Yep, that's fine.
This is the Distinguished Flying Cross. It's, you know, it's quite an important medal, and as I say, it was thrilled, obviously, to get it. Okay, this is the gunnery patch that I wore on my right sleeve up on top. This was my wings, which you wore on the left pocket. This is my dog tag. I'm not going to point too much. On the bottom is my chevrons, which shows the aviation, and the two red ones there, which is second class. Up here, right near me, the top medal is for the American campaign. This medal close to me here on the bottom is the American. Let me read this to make sure, if you don't mind. Can't even see it. Excuse me 1 second. Oh, European African Theater. They're very small.
Okay.
This was a good conduct medal, I believe, and this is the other one up on the other side in the middle is a World War II medal. I think I've covered all these medals.
Right.
The middle one is the Distinguished Flying Cross.
Okay, we have 5 minutes left.
Okay. You want me to pull some things out?
Whatever you want to show us, you said you had some other things.
Well, this one. I was home from leave, and it's my family. I'm right up close, as you can see. Sitting next to me is my brother-in-law, my sister's husband, who is it too glossy? Can you?
No, that's fine. Just
She's directly across from him is my sister. And next to him is my father, and directly across from him is my mother. And the first one of the ladies is my wife. I don't think we were married yet then, I'm not sure. So this was a good family picture.
Very
We
nice.
celebrated when I came back. These are some of the things you get when you finish the school. They give you these diplomas, U.S. Navy Gunnery School. Got it?
Okay, yep, got it.
This one is, well, I just graduated from something. Naval Training Course Certificate, Aviation Machinist made 3rd class. So, you know, it's like going to school, you get all kinds of diplomas.
Okay.
Let's just see what else is here quickly. What are the other things? All kinds of school things I don't have to show you.
You said you had your logbook with you? Let me just get a shot of that.
Pull this, please. There's yours. Did I put it down here?
No.
This is Aviator's Flight Logbook.
Let me zoom in
And
on
I'll show you something from the middle so you'll see how
Okay.
it works. All right, let me get a page with a lot on it. Am I okay here?
that. Yep, that's fine.
This was November 1944, and these are flights I made. The dates are up here, the type of airplane, the number of the plane, and if you notice, most of these are 08149, majority of the planes. And then the next thing is the type of flight. There are codes which I have in the back of the book which tells you what they are. And again here, Lieutenant Nicholson and I think they were all Nicholson at that point. Oh, here, as a matter of fact, it's interesting. This was on the way this is on the way back to Africa. See, San Juan to Trinidad, Trinidad to Belém, etc., etc. And it tells, we were back in action there, where it said you see Port Leote to Gibraltar?
Yep.
Right in the middle, and it says MAD, that's that magnetic airborne detector sweep, Port Leote to Gibraltar. So these are the type of things you write in your logbook, and it's an official logbook, it's signed and so on.
Okay,
well, that's-
I'm
That it?
down to 1 more minute, so if you've got
let's
any
see what I
final
got.
thoughts or...
Oh, final thoughts? Well, I really enjoyed this, let me put it that way. And I'm glad that they're keeping records of World War II people especially. By the way, are they taking veterans of other wars?
Oh, yes,
Good,
yes.
I'm glad to hear that. This is an interesting thing. Nothing else I can say except
Okay,
very
well-
enjoyable.
Thank you very
Very
much.
much. We are
A proof of a wedding picture. I was in my uniform.
very
obviously.
pretty.
Yeah.
How long have you been married now?
58 years, 1945.
Okay, thank
You
you.
got that?
Okay.
Now, where are you in that?
I think I may be right in the middle.
Oh, yes, on the
okay,
bottom.
yes, yep,
They're rather handsome people.
yep.
Yep. Okay.
Got it?
We got it.
Okay.
I'm going to